I didn't ruin my life. I didn't make one terrible mistake. I didn't choose the wrong person, the wrong city, or the wrong career in some dramatic, irreversible way. Nothing collapsed. Nothing burned. Nothing ended suddenly. My life just happened. And I let it. For a long time, I thought that was what adults did. You respond. You adapt. You deal with what's in front of you. You don't ask for more than what arrives. You accept circumstances as facts, not invitations. I told myself this was maturity. I see now it was passivity disguised as wisdom. Things came to me one after another: opportunities, responsibilities, expectations, and I took them because they were there. Because saying no would have required a reason. Because choosing something else would have required a vision I didn't have. So I drifted into roles instead of stepping into them. When people asked how I ended up where I was, I always had a logical explanation. One thing led to another. It made sense at the time. It just worked out that way. I sounded convincing even to myself. What I never said out loud was that I had never actively chosen this life. I had simply not resisted it. At first, that didn't bother me. My life wasn't bad. That's the cruelest part. If it had been miserable, I might have fought back sooner. Instead, it was acceptable. Comfortable enough. Structured. Predictable. Dangerously tolerable. I woke up, did what was expected of me, handled problems as they appeared, and went to sleep tired but functional. Days stacked on top of each other without friction. Weeks disappeared quietly. Years passed without leaving clear memories. I told myself I was busy. I told myself I was building something. I told myself meaning would come later, once things stabilized. But stability never arrives fully formed. It just becomes familiar. Sometimes, late at night, I would feel a strange distance from my own life, like I was watching it through thick glass. I could see everything clearly: the routines, the people, the responsibilities, but I couldn't feel connected to any of it. I wasn't unhappy. I was absent. I noticed it first in small ways. I stopped imagining my future. Not consciously, it just faded. When people talked about plans, dreams, 5-year goals, I nodded politely and contributed practical details, but nothing inside me moved. My future felt like an extension of my present, not a destination. I had no strong objections to my life. That should have scared me more than it did. The truth is, I believed life was something that revealed itself to you if you waited long enough. That clarity came from patience. That desire was overrated. I believed that wanting too much made people reckless, unhappy, disappointed. So I learned how not to want. When something stirred curiosity, dissatisfaction, envy, I neutralized it. That's unrealistic. That's not practical. That's not for people like you. I didn't hear these thoughts as fear. I heard them as reason. Over time, I became very good at reacting and very bad at initiating. I solved problems efficiently. I adapted quickly. I kept things running. But I never asked myself a simple, dangerous question: is this the life I would have chosen if nothing had pushed me into it? The answer terrified me. Because the honest answer was silence. I couldn't say yes. But I couldn't say no either. That's the space where a life quietly slips away. I remember a moment unremarkable, almost forgettable, when someone asked me if I was happy. Not jokingly. Not casually. They genuinely wanted to know. I paused. Not because I was searching for the right words, but because I realized I had never asked myself that question seriously before. Happiness felt like a vague concept, something other people chased or discussed, not something I actively evaluated. I'm fine, I said. And I believed it in the way you believe weather reports. But later that night, lying awake, the question returned. Not am I happy, but when did I stop caring whether I was? That was the first crack. I started noticing how often my life felt like maintenance. How every day was about keeping things going rather than moving anywhere. I wasn't building towards something. I was preserving what already existed. And preservation, without purpose, is just slow decay. The hardest realization came slowly. I had confused being responsible with being alive. I had mistaken endurance for depth. I had allowed my life to become a sequence of reactions instead of a series of choices. No one had taken my life from me. I had handed it over in increments so small they felt harmless. And once you realize that, you start seeing the past differently. Every moment you said it doesn't matter. Every time you waited for motivation instead of acting. Every decision you let default settings make for you. I didn't lose my life in one moment. I let it happen. And that realization was heavier than any failure I could have survived. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The way my life had been built not by intention, but by momentum. The way I had let circumstances choose for me because it was easier than asking myself what I wanted and risking the answer. The realization didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as grief. Grief for time that hadn't been stolen, only surrendered. I began to look back, not at dramatic crossroads, but at all the moments I had treated as insignificant. The invitations I accepted because declining felt awkward. The paths I stayed on because leaving would have required explanation. The quiet decisions where I told myself, this is fine, without ever asking if it was true. My life hadn't been shaped by bold mistakes. It had been shaped by default settings. That understanding followed me everywhere. In the morning, when I repeated routines that no longer felt connected to anything. In conversations, where I noticed how often I spoke about obligations instead of interests. In the mirror, where I saw someone who looked capable, composed, and strangely detached from their own existence. I started feeling a pressure inside my chest that I couldn't name at first. Not anxiety. Not sadness. Something closer to urgency mixed with shame. As if time itself were asking me to explain what I had done with it. I realized how little of my life I could claim as intentional. When had I last chosen something simply because it mattered to me, not because it was sensible? Not because it was expected. Because it felt alive. I searched my memory and came up empty. That frightened me. I had always believed that passivity was harmless. That as long as I wasn't hurting anyone, I was doing fine. But I began to understand that neglecting your own life is a form of harm, quiet, invisible, and cumulative. The world hadn't demanded much from me. I had demanded even less from myself. I started noticing people who lived differently. Not louder. Not more successful. Just more awake. They spoke about their days with texture. With frustration and excitement intertwined. Even when they struggled, they seemed present inside their own choices. I envied that presence more than any achievement. Meanwhile, my days felt smooth and slippery. Nothing caught. Nothing resisted. And without resistance, there was no sense of direction. Just continuation. The thought that haunted me most wasn't what if I fail if I change, it was what if I'm already failing by staying. I had built my identity around being adaptable. Reliable. Easy to work with. Easy to live with. Easy to place. But that ease had come at a cost. I had made myself so flexible that I no longer had a center. I didn't know what I stood for beyond keeping things running. That was when the fear shifted. It stopped being about the future and became about the past. About how much of my life had already been spent on autopilot. About whether it was even possible to start choosing now, or whether I had missed the window where choice still mattered. There were nights when I lay awake calculating time. Not in years, but in versions of myself that had never existed. The one who would have taken the risk earlier. The one who would have said no. The one who would have allowed discomfort to guide them instead of avoiding it. Those versions felt close enough to touch and impossibly distant at the same time. I asked myself the question that terrified me most: if I start living intentionally now, will it feel real, or will it feel like a late imitation of something I should have done sooner? The answer mattered because it determined everything. Part of me wanted to stay exactly where I was. To accept that this was my life now. To tell myself that awakening this late was unnecessary cruelty. That stability, even empty stability, was better than upheaval. Another part of me, quieter but more insistent, refused to be silenced. It reminded me that the years ahead were still years. That time doesn't return, but it does continue. That choosing late is still choosing. And that not choosing is still a decision, one that grows heavier the longer you carry it. I stood between two truths. One said, you've already let too much happen. Don't make it worse by disrupting what remains. The other said, if you don't start now, this will be the story of your entire life. That was the moral dilemma I couldn't escape. Not whether change was risky, but whether staying passive was something I could live with, now that I knew what it was costing me. I didn't have a plan yet. No clear destination. No dramatic vision of a better life waiting on the other side. I only had a growing certainty that continuing as I was would require me to keep disappearing. And for the first time, the fear of doing nothing felt greater than the fear of doing something. That's when I understood, awareness isn't the end of denial. It's the beginning of responsibility. I didn't wake up one morning transformed. There was no sudden clarity, no cinematic moment where everything aligned and I finally felt ready. What happened was quieter and more unsettling than that. I woke up and realized that continuing the same way would now require effort. Conscious effort. Awareness had ruined my ability to drift. Once you see the cost of passivity, you can't pretend it's neutral anymore. So I began with something small. Not a grand reinvention. Not a declaration. I made one decision that didn't arrive by default. One choice that came from me instead of momentum. It felt insignificant on the outside. On the inside, it felt like standing up after sitting for too long and realizing your legs are numb. Unsteady. Painful. Real. I questioned myself constantly. I wondered if I was being dramatic, if this awakening was just a phase, if I was about to dismantle a life that, while empty, was at least stable. Doubt followed every step. But something else followed too, a faint sense of alignment I hadn't felt before. For the first time, my actions matched my awareness. That didn't make things easier. It made them heavier. Responsibility is heavier than passivity because it removes excuses. When you choose, you can no longer blame circumstance. You have to live with the outcome, whatever it is. Some days, that terrified me. There were moments when I missed the old ease. The simplicity of letting things happen. The comfort of telling myself that life was just unfolding and I was merely participating. Choosing meant risking regret in a new way, not the regret of lost time, but the regret of mistakes. But I had learned something crucial. Regret from action hurts differently than regret from absence. Action regret is sharp, specific, and finite. You can name it. You can learn from it. Absence regret is endless. It has no shape, no moment to point to. It follows you quietly and asks, what if, until you stop answering. I began to build my life not around certainty, but around presence. I paid attention to how decisions felt in my body, not how they sounded when explained. I allowed myself to choose things that didn't look impressive. I accepted discomfort as information instead of a warning. Some things fell away. Not dramatically. Gradually. Relationships built on convenience loosened. Routines that existed only to fill time dissolved. Without passivity holding them together, they had nothing left to cling to. That loss hurt. There were nights when I wondered if I had made a mistake. Nights when loneliness felt louder than purpose. Nights when I envied people who seemed content letting life carry them forward without resistance. But even in those moments, something had changed. I was inside my life now. I felt the passing of time instead of watching it slide by. Days had texture again. Even the difficult ones. Especially the difficult ones. Pain felt cleaner than numbness. Fear felt more honest than apathy. I stopped asking whether it was too late. That question belongs to the version of me who was still waiting. The one who believed life began at the right moment, under the right conditions, with the right amount of preparation. I understood now that life doesn't begin when you're ready. It begins when you stop waiting. Looking back, I don't hate the person I was. The one who let life happen. They were trying to survive. They believed safety was the same as wisdom. They didn't know the cost of default living until it became undeniable. But I don't want to become them again. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself the one who is functioning, responsible, and quietly absent, I want you to hear this without judgment. You don't need to destroy your life to start living it. You don't need certainty, permission, or a perfect plan. You only need to stop letting everything important be decided by inertia. You only need to choose one thing, one that comes from you. Because the tragedy isn't failing after you try. The tragedy is reaching the end and realizing you never really did. I didn't lose my life in chaos. I almost lost it in comfort. And now, even when I'm afraid, even when I'm unsure, even when the path is unclear, I know something I didn't before. This life is no longer just happening to me. I'm finally living it.